Okay, this video is about adjusting the gantry lead screw. On a lot of machines it's the x-axis, on some longer machines it's the y-axis, depending on the machine. But what can happen is, if it isn't aligned, it can get really stiff. The screw can get very hard to turn close to the nut and jam. So what we do is we align it over close to the nut. So first thing I'm going to do is I'll just jog the machine close to the nut. Now this machine is in pretty good alignment, so it isn't jamming. And I'll turn the controller off. And you should be able to turn the screw in your fingers like this when it's close to the nut. You should be able to turn the screw like that with two fingers, with one hand, with the controller turned off. So if you can't, if it's really stiff, the thrust bearing, this is the thrust bearing. It's a double angular thrust bearing, and it's on this side. On the other side is the motor. So the motor is slightly adjustable, but the thrust bearing isn't. So we adjust the nut on this side. So there's three adjustments. There's three axes of rotation here. So there's the bottom plate, can be twisted this way or this way. This plate here is the it's the secondary nut. This is the lead screw nut. It's a Kirk anti-backlash nut with a preload. This plate is called the nut holder. This is the y-axis, or the driver plate, and this is the bottom plate. So you've got these two bolts here are for adjusting up and down. These two bolts under here are for adjusting front and back. And if we come around to the front, these two bolts here adjust the twist. So if these two are slightly, if you loosen these, so what we do is using a 5/32 T-handle, a good quality one, not a cheap one, because it'll strip. Loosen these, and then just loosen them and retighten them, and they'll self-center. Okay, so just loosen and retighten those. Don't overly tight, just nice little snug. And then we're going to do the ones underneath. So we're going to loosen these. Now you should be close to the, when you do this adjustment, you should be fairly close to the end here. So the nut, this is designed in a way where the nut spacing is just right whenever the gantry Z-axis head is near the side. So now we're going to loosen the bottom ones. You loosen the two of them, and you let them self-align. Okay, so we're going to loosen the two and then retighten them. Okay, and then the last ones we're going to do is this one. You can do them in any order really, but now this here is, I'm using a 3/16 on this one. It's just this machine has 3/16 socket heads. So we're going to loosen that. You can see when that's loose, the nut here is now loose a little bit, so it self-aligns. So that's allowing it to adjust up and down. So just loosen those, the two of them, and then retighten them. You have to loosen both of each set. No point just loosening one and retightening it. You have to do both at the same time so it can come loose and then retighten. So I'm using good quality T-handles here, using Vaco ones. Don't use the cheap Chinese ones. They'll just strip your bolts, and they'll then your machine will not. Don't use cheap tools. Anyway, so now I've realigned it. It turns very easy in my fingers, and that's the way it should be. If it doesn't turn easy in your fingers, the stepper motor will jam, especially at high speeds, because steppers have less torque at high speeds. What we're going to do though is, for the final adjustment, we'll jog the machine right to the other side, close to this side, and then just loosen the motor, just loosen the four motor bolts, and they're a 5/32, and then retighten them. That just allows the motor has a little bit of space to move around a tiny bit. So while the gantry, only do it when the gantry's over there. We'll move the gantry over. Now some lead screws have a little bit of a whip to them, but they come like that. As long as it's not a problem, don't worry about it too much, unless it isn't causing a problem. Lead screws will howl a bit when they get dry. The Delrin will howl, and generally graphite spray, a little bit of graphite spray on the lead screw will cure that. Don't use grease. Don't use lithium grease or any kind of grease, because grease will attract the dust, and then the dust will get inside the nut. Graphite spray is the best one. So I'm going to come around. So just loosen and tighten the four bolts here. Loosen them all just a little bit. And be careful of the wiring. And the motor now is a little bit loose. Then just tighten them again, and the motor will self-align if it can. But generally this side isn't a big problem, because this side doesn't come as close. It can only come within approximately 2 inches to the end of the screw, so it doesn't have the issue the other side has. The other side gets right up against the screw. Alright, because this side here has the dust collector arm, which keeps it away a little bit too. So anyway, that's how to align the gantry lead screw.